Hey guys, welcome to Calm History. My name is Stefan. Tonight we're slipping back into the damp, smoky heart of a medieval village, the kind with lopsided thatched roofs, chickens running underfoot, and a smell that sticks to your soul. It's early morning. The sky is still navy blue, breath fogs in the cold air, and you're being yanked from sleep by a rooster that seems personally offended by your existence. Somewhere, someone's already splitting wood. Someone else is yelling about a missing goat. You sit up on your straw mattress, scratch the flea bite on your ankle, and realize you're late. You were supposed to be in the fields by dawn. But hey, medieval timekeeping is more vibes than accuracy. There's no clock, only the light. When it rises, so do you. You throw on your scratchy wool tunic, same one as yesterday, and the week before, splash your face with cold water from a wooden basin, and munch half a barley loaf as you shuffle out the door. Breakfast? Optional. Tasks? Not so much. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Are you in bed already, or still pretending you'll go to sleep soon? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The village wakes around you, not with a bang but a slow groan. Smoke curls from chimney holes, children dart between cottages with bare feet and yesterday's grime still on their cheeks, and someone's already shouting about a missing spade. You trudge through the muddy lane, dodging both puddles and pig droppings, headed for your daily obligation, the fields. You're a peasant, maybe a villain if you're unlucky, or a freeman if you've won the medieval lottery. Either way, the Lord expects your labor. No punch clock, just muscle memory and a keen awareness of which day it is, because certain days belong to Him. Monday might be plowing, Wednesday threshing, Friday something worse, it usually is. You glance up. The manor looms in the distance like a smug older sibling. Your breath fogs again. There's frost in the air, and your fingers are already numb. Work waits. It always does. But first, animals. You check on the cow you're allowed to keep, shared with your neighbor, who swears it's mostly his cow. The goat eyes you suspiciously. The chickens are missing, again. You find them pecking at your neighbor's thatch, which you'll pretend not to notice because you need to borrow his hoe later. Back inside the cottage, your spouse is already elbow-deep in sourdough, and someone spilled oat mash on the hearth. The baby is wailing, the toddler is naked, and the cat has brought in something unfortunate from the hedgerow. You take a deep breath and trudge back outside. Morning routines aren't glamorous, but they're predictable. You know which family will fight, who'll be late, and who secretly drinks the ale early. The reeve will walk by soon, pretending not to judge you. He does. Everyone knows it. And then there's the rooster. He's still crowing. Somewhere, deep in your soul, you suspect he enjoys it. Historians still argue whether these early village rhythms were more brutal or just more basic. Life stripped down to work, weather, and whatever the animals felt like doing that day. But there's something grounding about it. You know your role. You know your neighbors too well. And there's a strange comfort in how absolutely nothing surprises you anymore. Except maybe the goat. One mainstream historical fact? Medieval villagers typically rose with the sun, no alarms, just light and livestock. Daily routines were tied to natural cycles, not ticking clocks. A quirky tidbit? Some villages trained their dogs to turn meat on the spit or chase birds from the crops. It's unclear whether the dogs enjoyed this promotion. By the time the sun clears the trees, you're out in the fields. Your hands ache. Your stomach rumbles. You wonder if you can sneak home early without being noticed. Spoiler, you can't. Still, the day is rolling. You're awake. You're alive. And in this village, that's already a win. The fields stretch behind you now, mud slick and bumpy, your back already tight from hours of bending over stubborn soil. You're headed toward the one building in the village that actually gets repaired when it falls apart, the manor house. It sits smugly at the edge of everything, just far enough to be above you, just close enough to keep an eye on you. That was on purpose, obviously. The Lord doesn't need to hear your gossip. but he definitely wants to know if someone's, accidentally, been helping themselves to extra strips of land or firewood. The manorial system may sound quaint now, but to you, it's just how the world works. Gravity pulls down, the sun rises in the east, and everything you grow, earn, or build technically belongs to someone else. The lord of the manor isn't a king, but you wouldn't know it by the way he struts. He owns the land, the rights to mill your grain, and a disturbing number of oxen. He may not live in the village full-time. Some lords preferred their other estates, or were off fighting, feasting, or failing at something politically disastrous. But when he does appear, everyone straightens up. Including you. He has stewards to oversee his lands, bailiffs to enforce his rights, and clerks to keep records of every chicken that's owed to him. You've seen that ledger. It's as thick as your leg and contains absolutely no mercy. It also has your name in it, spelled wrong, under the column that loosely translates to stuff owed, probably forever. Historians still debate whether medieval lords were genuinely invested in their villages or mostly absentee landlords in fancy cloaks. The truth? Probably both. Your current lord, Sir Ralph, visits twice a season. He smiles like he's trying it for the first time and smells like cloves and damp velvet. His arrival is announced with trumpets and dust, and children are expected to act like they haven't seen an actual chicken lose its head that morning. You remember the last time he came. He paraded down the muddy path on a white horse that absolutely hated being here. The horse tried to bite a turnip cart. Sir Ralph waved like a carved statue, then disappeared into the manor, where he presumably had wine and didn't have to step over pig droppings to get to his bed. The manor house itself is 2 stories tall, a luxury, made of stone, a bigger luxury, and features something you've only dreamed of, windows with actual glass. The inside? You wouldn't know, you've never been invited. But rumors float. A hearth so large you can stand inside it. Rooms with separate functions. A wooden staircase. And most unbelievable of all, a privy that isn't just a hole in the ground with angry spiders. Today you're delivering a portion of your grain. The steward, a pale man who constantly seems offended by your boots, meets you with a ledger and no eye contact. You hand over the sack, hoping it looks fuller than it is. He sniffs, makes a note, and tells you the Lord is expecting another goose by Michaelmas. You nod like that's possible. It isn't. Outside, a few of the village kids linger by the manor gate, hoping for scraps or a glimpse of nobility. One dares to knock on the side gate before running away, shrieking with joy and fear. You shake your head and head home. Here's a fun tidbit. Some lords demanded specific feudal duties that were creative. In one recorded case, a tenant owed his lord a gift of rose petals each year. Just petals. No explanation. Your lord prefers practical things, grain, eggs, occasional military service, but you'd almost prefer the roses. Back in the village, people are whispering about the new taxes, something about road maintenance. You haven't seen a road maintained since childhood, but sure. Meanwhile, the manor sits unchanged, like a stone reminder that no matter how hard you work, someone else is always a little cleaner, warmer, and less covered in goat fur. Still, it's not all bad. The Lord isn't cruel, just distant. He enforces the rules, collects his dues, and occasionally hosts a feast, if he's in a good mood and the reeve begs hard enough. The last one included meat, honey cakes, and that one song everyone pretended not to know the words to. As the sun tips downward and your legs threaten mutiny, you glance back at the manor house, silhouetted against the sky. It's not just a building, it's a symbol. Of power. Of order. Of all the things that don't belong to you. And you? You're just trying to survive another day under its long, well-shaded shadow. By the time you reach the edge of the manor grounds, the air feels different, cleaner somehow, like the mud knows not to cross into noble territory. The manor house looms, smug as ever, with its gray stone walls and roof that, astonishingly, doesn't leak. You pause for a moment, adjusting the sack on your shoulder and wiping your hands on your tunic, even though you know no one's watching. The place just has that effect. It's the biggest building for miles, which is saying something considering most homes are roughly the size of a bread oven. But the manor? 2 whole floors. A hearth in nearly every room. Real furniture. And walls so thick they could probably survive a siege, and let's be honest, they probably have. You pass through the open gate, nodding at the guard who's half asleep against the wall. He's chewing something that might be meat. Might not. Inside the courtyard, chickens scuttle underfoot, the stable boy swears at a horse with aristocratic contempt, and laundry flaps on lines strung between turrets. Even privilege has its chores. You've been here before. Not inside the manor, obviously. Just the outer buildings. The kitchen smells like spiced wine and roasted onions, which feels a bit like a personal insult considering your lunch was a cold turnip. You resist the urge to glare at the cook. She glares first, anyway. The manor itself has a large wooden door, decorated with iron hinges shaped like vines. Above it is a stained glass window depicting a knight slaying something that was probably supposed to be a dragon but looks suspiciously like a chubby lizard. 2 dogs nap beside the door, the fancy kind with names like Giles and Mercy, which you're not allowed to touch. Inside? That's a mystery. You've heard stories, though. A solar, that's a sort of sitting room for the family, with a cushioned bench by the window, where Lady Clarice embroiders tiny trees that look nothing like real ones. A great hall where meals are served on actual wooden tables, instead of laps, and where tapestries hang to keep out drafts and, more importantly, to show off. One local legend insists there's even a music room where someone once played a harp. A harp! The closest you've come to music is when Tom the swineherd whistles through the gap in his teeth. Historians still argue whether manor interiors were truly as grand as the documents claim, or if a lot of that fine carved oak was more like decent pine with attitude. Either way, they were warm, protected, and had something you don't, a roof that could keep snow out and secrets in. That's not to say life inside the manor was all lounging and lute music. Lords had to manage accounts, settle disputes, prepare for war, or at least pretend they were thinking about war. There were alliances to maintain, land boundaries to argue over, and marriages to arrange like particularly expensive livestock trades. Lady Clarice, meanwhile, was said to have over 20 gowns. No one's ever seen more than 2, but that hasn't stopped the gossip mill from inventing entire wardrobes. Someone swears she owns slippers sewn with pearls. Someone else swears she had them made from fox ears. The truth? You're never sure. You mostly just try not to spill anything when delivering firewood. Here's a quirky detail. Some manors had garderobes, built directly over streams, turning a bodily function into medieval plumbing, primitive, but efficient. Others simply hung a bucket out the window and hoped for the best. You'd rather not think about it, honestly. The steward appears again, scribbling something onto a wax tablet. He frowns at the goose you've brought. Apparently it's the wrong breed. You resist the urge to point out that all geese look furious and slightly possessed. He waves you off toward the storage shed, muttering about parchment and errors in the flocking records. As you pass the dovecot, a fat pigeon watches you with the weary eyes of someone who's been used to carry love letters, tax bills, and possibly one very awkward apology. The manor's communication hub is winged, judgmental, and slightly smelly. You finish your delivery, bow in the vague direction of the manor. You're not sure anyone's watching, but it's safer that way, and make your way back down the hill. The manor's silhouette cuts a sharp edge against the sky, its banners fluttering in the breeze. You imagine what it's like inside: warm floors, bowls of apples, and cups that don't leak. Maybe one day you'll be invited inside. Maybe not. But for now, it remains what it's always been, a world apart, stone and shadow and power you can't quite touch. Still, as you trudge back through the muck, one thing's certain: someone up there is definitely eating better than you. You don't even make it halfway back to your cottage before you hear it, the voice that makes you instinctively look busy. Ho there! That's not your ditch to stand beside. You sigh before turning. It's the Reeve. Of course it's the Reeve. He's not a noble, not a knight, not even particularly tall, but in the hierarchy of your village, he might as well be wielding a crown. The Reeve is one of you, a peasant chosen, though some say cornered, to serve as the village's go-between. Between you and the Lord. Between taxes and your aching back. Between doing your chores and being fined for not doing them. His name is Wymond. His beard is patchy, his patience thinner. He carries a staff not for defense, but for pointing at things disapprovingly. He's been reeve for 3 years now, which is roughly the emotional lifespan of a boiled onion. He doesn't smile much. Technically, the reeve is elected annually by the villagers. In practice, it's more like a game of not it. You remember the last reeve pretending to feign to avoid the job. Wymond blinked too slowly and suddenly found himself responsible for enforcing grain quotas, organizing labor crews, and inspecting your fence for insufficient structural character. That last one still feels personal. Historians still argue whether reeves held real authority or were just scapegoats wearing borrowed boots. In most villages, though, their power was real enough to make people tuck in their shirts and hide the extra piglet when he walked by. Wymond eyes your shoes, your sack. Your very soul. You know the south fields behind schedule, he says, like it's your fault winter came early last year and half the oxen mysteriously developed a limp. You nod. Everyone nods when the reeve speaks. It's safer. You promise to pass along the message. You don't. Neither does anyone else. Still, the reeve has his uses. He can delay your tax collection a week if he likes you. He can assign you to ditch cleaning duty instead of dung heaving if you bring him a nice enough trout. The power may be small, but in a village this size, small powers loom large. His daily job list is long and miserable, checking the village plowshares for damage, collecting fees at the mill, which is somehow always broken, making sure no one harvests firewood from the Lord's special trees, and keeping an eye out for what you all call accidental grazing, when someone's sheep wander into a richer pasture. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. In some villages, the reeve was required to memorize entire field patterns, planting schedules, and even disputes going back generations. One reeve in Norfolk was rumored to carry his memories in the form of carved wooden beads, each one representing a field, a feud, or a specific cow that had been at the center of some long-forgotten scandal. Wymond isn't quite so poetic. He just keeps a list on parchment that somehow always gets longer and smudgier with each week. When it rains, you can see the ink running down his sleeve like guilt. You watch him walk away, head bobbing slightly as he mutters about missing geese and misaligned furrows. You wonder if he even remembers what it felt like to be just another villager. Maybe he does. Maybe that's why he looks so tired. Being reeve is a thankless job. You get blamed when taxes go up, cursed when labor is assigned, and everyone assumes you're secretly pocketing something, even when the only thing you get extra of is scowls. And yet, someone has to do it. Without a reeve, the manor steward would manage things directly, and that's a nightmare no one wants to relive. The last time that happened, half the village spent 3 days threshing the wrong grain before anyone realized. So yes, Wymond is stern. Yes, he fines people for incomplete tool maintenance. But he's also the reason the village doesn't collapse into complete chaos. Only partial case. Which is probably the best you can hope for in a place where roofs fall in and ducks can trigger border disputes. You pick up your pace, avoiding the area he just gestured at, something about drainage again, and head home. The reeve continues on his rounds, a solitary figure wielding just enough authority to make life annoying, but not enough to actually change anything. Still, you'll give him this. Wymond remembers everyone's debts, land strips, and father's name. He's not above drinking with you when no one's looking. And when the mill broke last fall and you all thought you'd lose the winter stores, he stayed up 3 nights in a row trying to fix it with nothing but a lantern and pure spite. So maybe he's not the villain you paint him to be during whispered ill-timed jokes. Maybe he's just tired. Like everyone else. And he definitely still hates your fence. There's no signpost telling you where the village begins and ends. No stone walls, no dramatic gates, just a slow drift from pasture to plot to the cluster of buildings you and everyone else calls home. But if you squint past the chimney smoke and lean to sheds, you can start to see the logic in the layout. Or at least, the very enthusiastic attempt at logic. The heart of the village is a knot of houses and lanes, twisted together by centuries of foot traffic, cow traffic, and very poor urban planning. No two houses are quite aligned, and none of the lanes are straight. You suspect they were laid out by following whichever path the goats liked best. You stand on a gentle rise and let your eyes trace the familiar patchwork, narrow dirt paths squelching with mud, thatched roofs bowing under decades of weather and pigeon gossip, a small wooden bridge crossing what is optimistically called a stream but functions more like a gossip channel for ducks. Children dart between buildings with a speed and volume matched only by wind during a storm, and everything smells faintly of damp wool, firewood, and whatever's fermenting in someone's root cellar. Villages weren't randomly scattered, they grew around something. In your case, it's the church. Other villages might form around a stream crossing, a market road, or a particularly persistent tree. But yours began with God, then spiraled outward into pigs, barley, and barely contained neighbor disputes. Historians still argue whether medieval village layouts were shaped more by geography or by feudal politics. Some say it's the land, the hills, the rivers, the quality of the soil. Others say it's all about how close you lived to the Lord's front door. In your case, it's probably a mix of both, plus the occasional drunken decision involving fence placement and moonlight. The main road, or what passes for it, is a compacted strip of earth that turns into a soup in winter and a dust storm in summer. It wins its way from the manor gate to the village square, if you can call a flat and muddy spot with a public well and 3 benches a square. That's where you gather for announcements, arguments, and on rare days, dancing. Your home sits off one of the side lanes, along with 6 others, in what people jokingly call Smoky Row, because of how thick the air gets from cooking fires. Each cottage here has its own smell, its own sound, and its own collection of items leaning suspiciously against the wall, tools, buckets, and one wheel you've never seen move. Most cottages are one-room affairs with low doors, smoke-darkened rafters, and a floor that goes from dirt to packed mud if you're lucky. Your bed is a straw-stuffed sack shared with whoever you live with, and occasionally the neighbor's cat, who sneaks in through the roof. The fire pit sits in the middle, and the smoke mostly exits through a hole in the roof, unless the wind decides otherwise. Your neighbor to the left raises geese. Loud ones. The neighbor to your right brews a kind of ale that may or may not double as furniture polish. And in between? You trying to sleep through both. At the edge of the village sit the barns, grain storage sheds, and animal pens. They're collectively maintained and not particularly secure. More than one late-night snack has come from a borrowed egg or a mysteriously mobile carrot. But no one talks about that. At least not where the reeve can hear. Here's a fun tidbit. Medieval villages often included a green, a common open area where livestock grazed, deals were struck, and very suspicious accidents happened during wrestling matches. Your village green is lumpy, uneven, and currently occupied by a cow that belongs to no one and everyone at the same time. You pass the smithy, where sparks fly from the open doorway and the sound of hammer on iron makes even the roosters flinch. The blacksmith has one eye, arms like tree trunks, and a reputation for swearing in 3 languages. You like him. Next to that is the bakehouse, where communal bread is baked in a shared oven. You take your dough there weekly, trading gossip and judging the rise of your neighbor's loaves. Everyone pretends not to notice when someone forgets which one was theirs and grabs the better crust. Not far from the green is the church, the one true stone building besides the manor. It's modest, but solid, with a bell that rings unevenly and a priest who occasionally remembers his sermons. The church anchors the village spiritually, socially, and acoustically. And surrounding all this? The open fields. Plots of farmland fan out like spokes on a wheel, worked by every able-bodied villager. Your little strip might be 3 furrows wide and a quarter-mile long, shared with the family who always claims they were here first. There's a method to it all, however chaotic it feels. The village breathes as one organism, waking, working, feeding, arguing, and settling back into silence each night. The lanes wind, the roofs lean, the pigs roam, but it all somehow functions. Well, Usually. You duck beneath the low lintel of your cottage, again reminding yourself not to stand up too fast unless you enjoyed bruising your forehead, and step into the familiar gloom of home. It's not much, but it's yours. Sort of. Technically it belongs to the manor, like everything else, but you get to keep the rain off your back, mostly, and call this collection of mud, wood, and dreams your own. The air inside is thick with the comforting scent of wood smoke and something less comforting. Possibly the cabbage stew from 2 days ago that still lingers, stubborn as a cat on a warm stone. The walls are wattle and daub, a charming mix of woven twigs and dried mud, which cracks in summer and soaks through in winter. The thatched roof creaks overhead, thick with straw, mice, and whatever ambition you had to keep out drafts. Spoiler, it fails. Consistently. You step over a chicken. She doesn't flinch. She lives here too. The floor is hard-packed earth, though your spouse once scattered rushes over it to keep things fresh. They're no longer fresh. They're damp, trampled, and contain exactly one sharp pebble you forget about until it's lodged in your heel again. At the center of it all, the hearth. It's the soul of the home, even if it's more smoke than flame most days. A 3-legged iron pot bubbles quietly, barley, leeks, and the last turnip that didn't rot over winter. You breathe it in. It smells like every meal you've had since childhood. It smells like survival. Your bed is tucked into the corner, a wooden frame if you're lucky, with a straw mattress that pokes you in ways you've learned not to complain about. You share it with your partner, your youngest child, and occasionally the neighbors. Toddler who wanders in during thunderstorms. Warmth is communal, complaints are not. Above the hearth hangs a line for drying herbs and laundry. A collection of onions dangles from one beam, and a string of garlic from another, not for cooking, mind you, but to ward off spirits, plague, and that one neighbor who sniffs too much. There's also a small wooden icon of a saint watching over the room with eyes that seem mildly disapproving. You avoid making eye contact. Historians still argue whether these cottages were truly cozy or just a polite way to describe poverty. The truth lies somewhere in between, tight, smoky, shared spaces that required cooperation, routine, and a strong tolerance for snoring. You sit on a low stool near the fire, rubbing warmth into your fingers. Your eldest child enters, proudly holding a dented wooden pail full of water from the well. It's sloshing. Everywhere. You thank them anyway. Here's a fun little detail. Many cottages didn't have chimneys. The smoke just floated up and out through a hole in the roof, or didn't. Sometimes it clung to the beams, turning them black over time. Your lungs have become so used to the haze that stepping into fresh air feels like being smacked by a cool miracle. Next to the hearth is a wooden chest, your most valuable possession. Inside are clothes, maybe a few coins, and that one iron spoon you guard like treasure. Above it hangs your only mirror, polished metal that doesn't quite reflect anything correctly. It's like looking into a shiny puddle of judgment. The house isn't silent. Someone's always humming, coughing, laughing, or stepping on something they shouldn't. And the walls are thin, so thin you can hear your neighbors argue about onions again. You smile. It's not home without noise. You glance at the wooden shutter over the tiny window. It's closed tight to keep out the wind, though it also keeps out light, warmth, and any idea of the time. Candle stubs sit nearby, expensive and precious. You'll save them for later, when the dark comes fully and the fire dies down to gentle coals. A cat curls up near the hearth. No one remembers when it moved in, but it's earned its keep by murdering several rodents and glaring judgmentally at guests. You've named it Lord Fluff, which feels like a safe way to talk back to the actual Lord without consequence. Despite the smallness, the leaks, and the constant smell of something vaguely sour, your home is your world. You know every creak in the beam, every uneven floorboard, every trick to keep the door from swinging open when the wind shifts. It may not be grand. It may not be dry. But it holds your warmth, your meals, your stories. And as you lie back that night, wrapped in the scratchy embrace of wool and familiarity, you hear the faint drumming of rain on the thatch. It's leaking again. Right into your left boot. Of course it is. You're up before the sun again, because of course you are, and this morning's task is a real treat, fieldwork. Not just any field either. You're headed to your designated strip in the open field system, the agricultural backbone of your medieval village. It's communal, it's mandatory, and it's just confusing enough to spark drama before breakfast. The land around your village isn't divided into neat little fenced-in farms. No, that would be far too simple. Instead, the open field system rules here, an enormous, sprawling expanse of farmland divided into long, narrow strips. Each household gets a few of these strips, scattered across different fields like someone threw a bundle of spaghetti and said, "Perfect, that'll feed a community." Your strips are rarely next to each other, which means a lot of walking and a lot of muttering. Today, you're assigned to the east field, right between the widow Marjorie's unusually fertile barley plot and old Edwin's furrow, which he plows like he's chasing demons. You've already lost one hoe to his overzealous ridging. The system was designed for fairness. In theory. Everyone gets a mix of good, bad, and why is this even called soil? Land. That way, no one monopolizes the rich black earth near the stream or gets stuck entirely with the stony garbage near the ridge. It's a nice idea. Until it rains, or someone forgets which strip is theirs, or you accidentally plant peas in someone else's allotment and pretend you didn't. Historians still argue whether the open field system fostered true cooperation or barely concealed resentment with a sprinkle of shovel-based sabotage. From your experience? It's both. The village relies on shared labor, plowing, sowing, harvesting together, but that doesn't stop people from side-eyeing your turnips and whispering that your wheat looks a little too golden, doesn't it? You reach your strip and glance around. It's been marked, kind of. A few stones. A bent stick. One sheep's skull that's definitely not symbolic but feels personal. You mutter a quick blessing, mostly out of habit, then get to work. Plowing is a group affair. The village shares a team of oxen, which move at the pace of a sleepy snail and smell like wet despair. The plow itself is a heavy wooden contraption with an iron-tipped blade, and guiding it requires the strength of 3 men or one very angry widow. You get assigned as the guide today, because of course you do. Your boots squish in the mud. The plow groans. The oxen groan louder. And your back already regrets being born into this century. There's no privacy in the open field system. You work shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, hearing every cough, every complaint, every time someone lets their dog wander onto your beans. You catch snatches of conversation, mostly complaints about taxes, weather, and Marjorie's alleged oat hoarding. Oh, and fences? Forget it. This land is open. Which means livestock wandering in where they shouldn't. Which means you chasing sheep with a stick while screaming, "Not again, Gregory!" at the same goat who always finds your barley. Here's a fringe gem for you. Some villages use scarecrows shaped like priests to ward off birds. Others used children. Neither method was particularly effective, but both were hilarious in their own way, especially when a magpie stole Father Auric's hat. By midday, you've plowed half your strip, helped free the plow from a tree root, and watched 2 neighbors argue about who left manure in whose furrow. It's exhausting, messy, and communal in the truest sense. Your success literally depends on your neighbor's work, and your neighbor is currently whistling instead of sewing. Lunch is taken on the edge of the field: barley bread, a hard chunk of cheese, and an apple that's more wrinkled than fruit. You chew slowly, eyes on your strip, ears open to more bickering. Somewhere, someone started singing. You hate them slightly. The open field system is more than just shared land, it's shared time. Shared tools. Shared disasters. When the harvest is good, you all celebrate. When it fails, you all tighten your belts and stare at your neighbor's geese with growing interest. And when it's finally time to divide the harvest, it's done under supervision. Carefully measured. Carefully weighed. Carefully watched. Because fairness is only real if everyone believes in it, and after the incident with the extra sheaf, accidentally, found in Edwin's pile last year, no one takes chances. You stretch your back, smear mud off your hands, and call it a day. The sun dips low. The field glows gold. It's not perfect, but it's alive. Shared. Fought over and cherished. And tomorrow? You'll be right back here, squinting at that same crooked skull, wondering who moved your marker stick and pretending your ox doesn't have an attitude problem. The fields fall behind you as you follow the muddy path back toward the heart of the village, where the land opens up into a wide, grassy stretch known as the Commons. Or, as you and your neighbors like to call it, everyone's land and no one's responsibility. The Commons is a curious thing. It's shared space, technically overseen by the Lord, but used freely by the villagers. It's where your sheep graze, your kids wrestle, and your chickens stage their daily act of rebellion. It's the closest thing you have to democracy, and also the source of 90% of your arguments. You arrive just as a familiar scene is playing out. Old Berta is shaking her stick at a cow that is definitely not hers, accusing it of trampling her herbs. The cow responds by chewing slowly and blinking. Its expression is unreadable. Possibly judgmental. The idea behind the Commons is simple: a shared pasture where villagers graze their animals, gather firewood, cut turf, and let off steam. No fences, no ownership, just an unspoken agreement that everyone uses it fairly. Except no one uses it fairly. People, accidentally, graze their animals longer than allowed. They cut more wood than they should. And every spring, someone's pigs mysteriously multiply just before the tally. You've seen a single goat claimed by 3 families, all with very convincing backstories. The goat seems amused. Historians still debate whether the Commons was a triumph of rural cooperation or just a ticking time bomb of passive-aggressive behavior. You lean toward the latter. Every inch of land is precious, and when winter looms, even the most God-fearing neighbor will eye your pile of firewood like it owes them rent. Still, you understand the Commons. It's freedom. In a world of dues, rents, tithes, and obligations, it's one of the few places where you can just be. Where your geese can honk with abandon. Where your children can run and shriek and wrestle in the weeds without knocking over something valuable. You pass a small group gathered around the edge of the copse, collecting kindling. They're speaking in low voices, casting glances toward the manor. Technically, gathering deadwood is allowed. Technically. But the definition of dead is flexible, and the steward has been on a tear. Lately. Last week, he fined a man for taking unauthorized twigs. That's a direct quote. You move on before you get involved. You've got your own mission, collecting dung. Yes, really? Animal dung is precious fuel in winter, and half the reason the Commons doesn't smell like roses. You find a few promising piles, scoop them into a sack, and try not to think too hard about your life choices. Near the stream, someone's washing wool. The water is brown, the wool is brown, and yet somehow, they'll both come out scratchy and vaguely yellow. You nod politely. They nod back. You both know the stream is also the village's laundry, drinking, and emergency bathtub facility. You both choose not to comment. Here's a delightful fringe fact. Some villages had strict Commons customs, including days when certain animals weren't allowed to graze to let the grass recover. One village even had goose-free Tuesdays. You've proposed it here before. The geese disagreed. As the day dips toward evening, the Commons becomes noisier. People return from the fields, gathering to chat, argue, or barter. Someone brings a drum. Someone else starts dancing. A child throws a turnip at a sibling. It's chaos, but a familiar kind, the kind you can settle into like an itchy blanket. A traveling peddler sets up near the old oak. He's got ribbons, iron nails, and questionable powders he claims will keep away spirits and in-laws. You consider buying one. Not for the spirits. The Commons is also where judgments are whispered and reputations made. Who helps gather wood for the elderly? Who cuts in line at the mill? Who's been sneaking out past curfew to check the moonlight? You pretend not to know anything. You do. But for all the squabbles and stink, the Commons is the soul of the village. It's the one place where roles blur, where the reeve might help chase off a fox, where the blacksmith might share an apple, where a lord steward might trip in a cow pat and earn the biggest laugh of the season. That actually happened. Twice. As the sun sets behind the hills, painting the commons in amber light, you sit on a smooth stone near the stream. Children splash. A dog barks at nothing. The breeze smells like grass, smoke, and faint manure. It's oddly peaceful. You know the system is flawed. You know people cheat. But you also know that when a neighbor falls ill, others bring food. When a roof caves in, hands arrive to rebuild it. When the storms come, and they always do, you'll stand together on this field, shoulder to muddy shoulder. You head home with your sack of dung, your aching back, and the faintest smile. The commons may be a mess, but it's your mess. And that makes all the difference. You wake to the sound of hoofbeats on packed mud and the faint creak of a cart rolling past your window hole. Another morning, another reminder, you are a serf. Or as you like to think of it, freelancer with very few options and zero negotiation power. Being a serf isn't glamorous. It's not even mildly tolerable most days. But it's the reality for most villagers like you. You're not a slave, exactly. You can't be bought or sold. But you are bound to the land. If the manor changes hands, you go with it, like furniture, but with more back pain. Technically, you owe your lord labor in exchange for protection. Realistically, you do a lot of digging while he owns 4 cloaks and hasn't protected anyone since he tripped on a goose. The word serf comes from the Latin servus, meaning slave, though medieval folks like to think of themselves as a few rungs above that. You're tied to your holdings. That means you can't leave without permission, can't marry off your daughter without approval, and if you die, your best ox goes to the manor under something charmingly named the Harriet. You learned that one the hard way. This morning you're assigned to boon work, that's unpaid labor for the Lord, which somehow manages to feel even more unpaid than usual. You're headed to help repair a road that hasn't looked like a road since last spring's flood, but it's not like you can say no. Historians still argue whether the burden of serfdom varied wildly between regions or if it was consistently terrible. Evidence suggests both. Some lords were lenient, others collected dues like a debt-collecting hawk with a very sharp quill. Yours falls somewhere in between, firm, but not flay you for blinking wrong harsh. You passed on the thatcher, who's muttering about needing straw for 3 roofs and only having enough for half of one. He's a free tenant, which means he pays rent but doesn't owe labor. You envy him. Slightly. But also, his taxes are worse. And his boots leak more. Back on the road, you settle into the familiar rhythm of hauling, patching, digging, sweating. You're working next to Hilda, who once beat a grown man with a shovel for stepping on her onions. She's your favorite. She hands you a chunk of bread without comment. You nod and thanks. The Reeve strolls past to supervise, which means he holds a stick and occasionally tells you you're doing it wrong. You smile through gritted teeth. It's fine. You're used to it. Everyone here has been a serf long enough to know how to smile, while internally screaming. Here's a bizarre fringe tidbit. In some manors, serfs were allowed to brew ale, but only a set amount, and only if they paid the ale fee. Yes. A fee to make your own sadness drink. You once tried to skip it. The steward showed up, drank your ale, and fined you anyway. Midday brings a short break, during which you eat barley porridge, warm from your pouch and flecked with something. Probably edible. You sit on a rock and squint at the horizon, where your lord's land ends and freedom supposedly begins. You've never been there. But you've heard stories. Could you leave? In theory. If you had money. Or a horse. Or no fear of being dragged back and fined for running. Occasionally, someone does vanish, off to a town where freedom might cost less than it smells. But most of the time, people stay. Because this land, miserable as it is, knows you. And you know how to survive on it. You finish your work, your fingers sore and your shoulders knotting like badly tied rope. On the way back, you pass the mill, where the miller gives you that look again, the one that says he's going to, accidentally, keep too much grain from your next load. You note it. You'll accidentally let his chickens out later. That's the thing about being a serf. You learn to bend, to barter, to whisper. Life isn't fair, but it can be managed. Through favors. through quiet revenge, through carefully hoarding a bit of honey when no one's looking. And when evening falls, you don't feel pride exactly, but you feel steadiness. A kind of resilience that only comes from doing what must be done, every day, without complaint that anyone will ever hear. You're not free. But you're not broken either. Not yet. The church bell rings just before dusk, its uneven clang echoing across the fields like a drunk calling last orders. It's not Sunday, which means it's either a feast day, a warning, or Father Oswin has decided it's time to assert spiritual dominance over the goats again. You follow the sound to the center of the village, where the church squats like a stone guardian among the leaning cottages. It's the only building besides the manor made of proper dressed stone, thick, cool, unmoving. Its small, stained glass windows glow faintly in the falling light, casting slivers of color onto the worn flagstones outside. The church isn't just a place for prayer. It's where babies are baptized, couples are married, and the deceased are shuffled into the next world with various degrees of ceremony and mud. It's where you gather on feast days, fast days, holy days, and days where nobody's quite sure what's going on but the bell rang so you'd better show up. You step through the arched doorway into the nave, where flickering candles fight the dusk and incense clings to the air like a hopeful fog. The smell is part comfort, part nose pinch. You take your usual seat on the hard wooden bench, no backrest, obviously, and nod to the familiar faces around you. Up front, Father Oswin clears his throat. He's the village priest, and his sermons are equal parts scripture, guilt, and local gossip in disguise. He wears a threadbare cassock and a permanent look of someone who's either fasting or thinking about it. You respect him. Mostly. Though you still haven't forgiven him for that homily about greed that coincided suspiciously with you getting a second duck. The sermon begins with a parable about St. Wulfstan and somehow detours into a lengthy anecdote about the perils of oversalting pork. You try to focus, but your stomach growls and someone 2 benches down has clearly brought a turnip. It smells both comforting and distracting. Historians still argue whether the medieval village church was a true moral compass or just the loudest building with seating. You think it's both. It's certainly the only place where even the Lord sits down and listens, or pretends to. It's also the only place where time is measured in something other than crop cycles, matins, vespers, mass. Your calendar is carved in saints and sacraments. Here's a delightful detail. Some churches kept relics, bits of saints, or what were allegedly bits of saints. Yours has a knuckle bone that Father Oswin insists belonged to St. Fried Swide. Someone else swears it's just a polished sheep vertebra. Either way, it gets pride of place in a little niche by the altar, and you've seen people whisper to it in bad winters. The church is more than religion. It's the nerve center of your social life. It's where banns of marriage are read, where disputes are settled, and where the whole village once gathered to chase a bat out of the rafters with hymnals. It's also the only space big enough to hold everyone at once, which makes it your de facto town hall, theater, and panic room. After the sermon, the priest announces the upcoming feast of St. Botolph. This means fasting the day before, bringing bread for the poor, and pretending you didn't forget the words to the special hymn. Again. As the congregation files out, people linger in the churchyard. They tidy the graves, gossip in lowered tones, and point out the new moss growing on the south wall. You take a moment to light a candle, quiet, personal, flickering in the stillness. A prayer for health. For peace. For a break in the rain. The bell rings again as the priest locks up for the night. You begin the slow walk home under a darkening sky, the comfort of ritual humming gently in your bones. You may not understand every Latin word. You may not agree with every penance. But the church grounds you, binds the village together with stone and story, and reminds you that no matter how cold the nights get, there's always a candle somewhere, burning, steady, small. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The village smells like bread today. You know before you even step outside, warm, yeasty air drifting through the cracks in the shutter, mingling with wood smoke and that ever-present undercurrent of damp sheep. It can mean only one thing: feast day. Again. You sigh a little as you lace your boots. Because while a feast day sounds like something involving roasted meats and dancing, in medieval village reality, it's more complicated. More sacred. More exhausting. This one is for Saint Botolph, patron of travelers and boundaries, which feels oddly appropriate when you remember how much walking and waiting these days require. The church bell has already rung once this morning, calling everyone in for the early mass. You trudge along the familiar lane, ducking under laundry lines and sidestepping an impressively stubborn goose, and join the small crowd filing into the church once again. Father Oswin is waiting, resplendent in his finest robes, only slightly moth-chewed, and definitely more colorful than usual. Someone's polished the brass candlesticks, and a few extra rushes have been scattered down the aisle. This is as close to glamorous as it gets. The service runs long, filled with chant, incense, and passages about virtue that you're 90% sure are aimed at whoever's been stealing eggs from the sacristy. Looking at you, Gerwin? Afterward, the real work begins. Because feast day doesn't mean rest day. Not exactly. Historians still argue whether feast days were welcome pauses or just cleverly disguised workload reshuffles. What you know is this: they are loud, chaotic, and come with rules so specific they feel personal. You're not allowed to eat meat today, unless it's a double feast day, or the feast falls on a Sunday, or you're under 7, over 70, or pregnant, or if your cow died last week and the weather's been unusually moist. Which, yes, always. So no meat, but plenty of bread. You join the line at the communal bakehouse, clutching your loaf. Everyone brings one on feast days. It's meant for the poor, the sick, or for a meal shared after prayer. You eye the loaves on the bench. Someone used right this time. Fancy. The women cluster nearby, whispering not so quietly about who's wearing their hair down, scandalous, who brought 2 loaves instead of 1, humble brag, and who might be secretly courting the new Reeves' cousin, unforgivable. You say nothing. But you listen. Feast days also come with expectations. You're meant to give alms, coins if you have them, food if you don't. You drop a handful of dried beans into the collection bowl and try not to notice how many others are doing the same. Coins are scarce. Hope is more common. After the formalities, the day lightens. Children chase each other in the churchyard, shouting things that are probably heretical if taken literally. A fiddler appears, no one knows from where, and starts a tune that loops through the crowd like a laugh. You find yourself seated on a rough bench next to old Marjorie, who immediately launches into her usual story about how Saint Botolph once appeared to her in a dream to remind her to stir her porridge. You nod respectfully. This is how these days go. Stories, shared food, and a deep sense that everyone's pretending they aren't planning to nap the moment this is over. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some villages, feast days included bizarre rituals. One involved dancing backward around the church 3 times. Another involved dressing a goose in ribbons. Your village sticks to the basics: bread, blessings, and a small miracle if nobody fights over seating. As the sun starts to dip, you walk the edge of the commons, belly full of pottage, head light with music. There's a strange hush after a feast, the quiet of people worn out from smiling, from standing, from balancing piety and hunger. You spot the miller's wife sleeping on a bench, her mouth open, one sandal dangling from a toe. She looks peaceful. She also has your spoon. But you let it go. It's a feast day. Mercy feels good. The church bell rings one final time, marking vespers. You head home through the long shadows, feeling more settled than usual. It wasn't a holiday, not in the way modern folks might imagine. But it was a pause. A breath. A day spent remembering that community isn't just shared land, it's shared rhythm. Tomorrow you'll be back in the fields, or fixing that fence again, or pretending not to hear the reeve. But tonight? Tonight you rest. And you dream of bread. The market arrives before sunrise, rolling in with the clatter of carts, the shouts of drivers, and that one goose that apparently thinks it's in charge. You wake to the noise and the unmistakable scent of something new: horses, spices, bodies, and coin. It smells like a day of possibility. And also like someone dropped a wheel of cheese somewhere inconvenient. Market day doesn't happen often, maybe once a week, or even once a month, depending on your village's size and fortune. Yours is small, but it's situated just close enough to a trade route that a handful of merchants bother to stop by, unpacking their wares with exaggerated sighs and suspicious smiles. By the time you reach the village green, the transformation is complete. The commons has become a makeshift marketplace, full of stalls, blankets, barrels, and one very ambitious boy trying to sell frogs in a basket marked healers. The blacksmith's apprentice is already bartering for new nails. 2 women argue over a bolt of cloth. And a stranger in a wide-brimmed hat is offering something called saffron, from a jar that smells exactly like dried grass and disappointment. You bring your own goods, of course. Eggs, maybe a small cheese, a half-dozen turnips so stubborn they practically have their own wills. You're not here to get rich. You're here to trade. To glimpse what the outside world has decided is worth having this week. To maybe get your hands on something slightly ridiculous and deeply impractical, like a comb with actual teeth still attached. The man running the toll booth is new. He wears a felt cap too large for his head and demands 1 penny to enter, 1 to leave, and another if your cart has wheels. You don't have a cart. You don't even have a basket. But he eyes your feet like he's about to charge you for using the road. You mutter a prayer and walk fast. Historians still argue whether market tolls were necessary civic upkeep or pure opportunistic extortion. Judging by today's booth setup, 2 crates and a blanket with toll written in chalk, you lean toward the latter. Markets aren't just about goods. They're about gossip, matchmaking, low-stakes gambling, and watching that one man try to juggle apples until he drops one into a chicken cage. You learn more in 1 hour here than you do in a week in the fields. You learn that someone in the next village oversaw a comet and thinks it's a sign. That a traveling monk has predicted a great flood. That a merchant swears the king was recently seen riding a donkey through a tavern. That one might be true. You nod politely and quietly tuck all of it away for later retelling, ideally near a hearth with ale. Here's a fringe market detail for you. Some traveling sellers use rhymes to advertise their wares, especially if they're selling miracle cures. You hear one now. For boils and bites and beast and knees. 1 drop of this shall bring you ease. You glance over. The seller is holding a bottle of something green. Very green. It sloshes in a suspicious way. You buy one. You're not proud. Your friend Elric finds you just after midday, red-faced and triumphant. He's bought a silver buckle that is definitely tin and possibly part of a spoon. He's thrilled. You say it looks noble. You both know it doesn't. The church watches the market warily. Father Oswin has already announced that no gambling is allowed, that all weights must be fair, and that under no circumstances should anyone let a juggler inside the nave again. You agree in theory but still watch the juggler. He's gotten better. Only 2 apples down so far. As the sun drops low, people begin to pack up. Goods are traded back, carts reloaded, chickens recaged, mostly, and children rounded up from under the stalls where they'd been hiding. You've traded eggs for a tiny wooden carving of a dog that looks vaguely like a loaf of bread. You love it anyway. You also bought a dried fig. 1 fig. It cost half a penny and came from a place so distant it might as well be the moon. You save it for later, something sweet to cut through the barley and bitterness of your usual diet. The market empties slowly. Laughter fades. Hoofbeats retreat. Someone's left a hat behind, which you hang on a fence post because it seems like the right thing to do. You walk home with lighter arms and a heavier pouch, small things, silly things, but full of meaning. A day like this reminds you that the world is wider than your fields. That there are colors beyond brown and gray. That you're not alone in your hunger for something different. And that sometimes, even the worst toll collector has to pack up and go home. You don't need a rooster this morning. The sound of a broom smacking a cooking pot is enough. Again. It's your wife. Or your sister. Or your grandmother. Maybe all 3, depending on the size of your household and just how much chaos is required to get the day going. The women of your village are already awake, already working, already 3 steps into a list of chores that will stretch unbroken, until nightfall. There's bread to bake, water to haul, babies to hush, and stew to stir. And that's before the sheep even finish bleating. Being a woman in a medieval village means knowing how to make pottage, babies, and your peace with back pain. It means waking before everyone else and going to bed after the fire has burned to a whispering glow. It means multitasking before the word existed, and usually while holding a toddler on your hip and using your elbow to keep a goat out of the flour. You step outside and watch them at work. One woman is grinding grain by hand, her arms rhythmically turning the heavy stone quern. Another is shaking out linens near the well, glaring at the sky like it owes her an apology. A third is weaving rushes into mats while keeping one eye on a trio of children attempting to climb a pig. In this village, women run the place. Quietly, firmly, without asking for credit. Historians still argue how much power medieval women actually had. In legal terms, limited. In daily life, enormous. They controlled the food, the hearth, the rhythms of home. They carried knowledge, of herbs, of healing, of when the bread is just about right. They were midwives, brewers, caretakers, bakers, whisperers of truth over laundry tubs. Your wife, Agnes, is stirring something thick and fragrant in the pot, her brow furrowed in concentration. You ask if it's stew or porridge. She says, yes, and keeps stirring. Over at the edge of the green, the village women gather to wash clothes. It's a loud, laughing circle of gossip and elbow nudges. Topics range from the new priest's pronunciation of Latin, to the Reeve's suspicious fondness for widow Edith's goat, to who's having a third child rather soon. Nothing escapes them. Not even you. And don't think these women are soft. They wrestle geese, birth babies, mend fences, patch shoes, butcher rabbits, and survive childbirth at odds worse than a dice game in a thunderstorm. One of them once fought off a wolf with a broken broom handle. You still bring it up every winter. Here's a lesser-known tidbit. In some medieval villages, ale brewing was entirely a female domain. These alewives were known for their strong drink, stronger opinions, and iconic signs, bunches of broom hanging outside their doors to announce a fresh batch. You've sampled some. You still can't feel your tongue quite right. Inside the home, women run the show. They track food stores, repair clothes, organize feast preparations, and somehow remember everyone's birthday even though no one has a calendar. When illness strikes, it's not the priest who knows what poultice might help. It's Margaret 2 doors down, with her dried herbs and her terrifyingly calm demeanor. And yet, legally, women are second. A daughter's marriage requires her father's consent. A widow must petition to keep her husband's land. A woman caught stealing bread is punished more harshly than a man caught stealing a pig. Because one is seen as property loss, the other disobedience. Still, they endure. And more than that, they thrive. Not loudly. Not in songs. But in the quiet certainty of getting it done, again and again, no matter the weather, the price, the gossip, or the strain. You see it in Agnes's hands, scarred from nettle stings, cracked from winter wind. You see it in her eyes, lined from squinting into fires and futures. You see it in the way she passes a bowl of stew to your youngest without even looking, because she already knows he's hungry. And you realize, not for the first time, that this village stands on earth, stone, and the backs of women. Later that evening, as the fire dwindles and the room settles into shadow and breathing, you catch a final glance of Agnes sewing by candlelight. One eye closed. Needle moving. Steady. Certain. She hasn't said a word in an hour. But she's still running everything. The first sound you hear isn't the rooster, it's laughter. High-pitched, chaotic, and followed by a sharp thud. You open your door just in time to see 2 children sprinting past, one holding a stick, the other chasing with what looks suspiciously like half a cabbage. It's not a festival day. It's just a normal morning. Which, for children in your village, means games, chores, and minor injuries. Usually in that order. In a medieval village, childhood isn't some separate world of toys and lullabies. It's more like a half-step into responsibility. You're not a baby anymore, so you work. But you're not grown either, so people still pretend your mistakes are cute. Unless you break the butter churn. Then it's serious. You watch as a gang of them forms around the puddle, 5 of them arguing about whether it's deep enough to jump, and one already wet up to the knees. No one's watching them closely. No one needs to. They know the village like they know their own feet, every bend, every chicken, every low-hanging beam to avoid unless you're trying to lose a tooth. Chores come early. By the age of 5 or 6, a child is already hauling water, gathering kindling, shoeing geese, and occasionally being used as bait for the neighbor's goat. The line between work and play blurs. Herding sheep becomes a game. Grinding grain turns into a race. And sweeping the floor is only tolerable if it includes yelling. Historians still argue how childhood was understood in the Middle Ages, whether it was seen as a meaningful phase or just a holding pattern before your hands got big enough to grip a plow. But in practice, kids are still kids. Even if they have calluses. You pass the smithy and see the blacksmith's boy trying to balance a hammer on his head. His father is yelling. The hammer falls. Everyone moves on. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval children's games would look familiar to you. Tag, blind man's bluff, hoop rolling. Others, not so much. There's one called knuckle bones, played with the ankle bones of sheep, and another that appears to involve spinning until you fall over and then accusing someone else of witchcraft. You find your own youngest crouched near the herb patch, poking at a beetle with intense scientific focus. You ask if the bucket's been filled. He nods. You ask where the bucket is. He points vaguely. It's in the stream again. You sigh, but not too hard. You remember being his size, poking frogs, dropping things, learning slowly that the world doesn't bend easily, even for short legs. Children aren't educated in the modern sense. There's no school unless you're wealthy or the priest takes a liking to you, and even then, it's mostly Latin and stern glances. But they learn all the same, through repetition, observation, and that one cousin who insists they know everything and is always wrong. You pass the bakehouse and see a girl no older than 7 slapping dough into a neat round shape. Her mother doesn't even look up. She's already trusted to do it right. In this village, childhood is a narrow bridge. You're allowed joy, but not laziness. You're allowed mistakes, but not too many. And always, the horizon of adulthood looms. Your first time driving the oxen, your first solo chore, your first time being trusted to carry fire without setting your own sleeve. Alight. But until then, you run. You scrape your knees. You make games out of sticks, stones, pigtails, and your older siblings' mild humiliation. You giggle too loud during prayer and swear you saw a ghost near the mill. You swear it again next week. No one believes you. That's part of the game too. Evenings bring slower energy. The children cluster near hearths, snacking on crusts, dozing in laps, or inventing lullabies out of nonsense syllables and goat noises. The tired ones fall asleep wherever they land. The sneaky ones try to stay awake, ears perked for grown-up talk, faces illuminated by the flicker of fire. You remember how that felt. You catch your youngest hiding behind the barrel again, clearly listening, eyes wide and curious. You let them stay. If the stories are good, they'll carry them forever. Because here in the village, childhood may be muddy, loud, and full of blisters. But it's also where you learn what matters, how to endure, how to belong, and how to laugh, even when your only toy is a rock with a name. You're hunched over a small fire pit this morning, poking yesterday's embers with a stick that was once a broom and might now be your only cooking utensil. Your fingers are cold. The pot is reluctant. And your stomach is doing that low, echoing grumble that tells you it's been too many meals since the last decent one. Welcome to mealtime. Food in your medieval village isn't about variety. It's about survival. It's also about pottage. Always pottage. If you're not familiar, it's a thick stew made of whatever you have, barley, peas, leeks, that one stubborn onion, and if fortune smiles upon you, a scrap of bacon. Maybe. Once a week. On a good week. Breakfast is optional. More of a suggestion, really. Maybe some coarse bread and a sip of ale. Yes, ale. Weak, warm, and safer than water, which might contain more life than you're comfortable drinking. You glance over at your woodpile, if it can be called that. 3 sticks, 2 damp branches, and 1 questionable piece of someone's fence. Firewood is precious. So precious, in fact, that entire village feuds have sparked over accidental, kindling borrowings. Historians still argue how dire the fuel shortages really were in medieval villages. What you know is this: if it burns, it's fuel. Dung. Twigs. Even old boots if they're dry enough. You once saw someone trying to roast a bird using straw. The bird survived. The straw did not. As you feed the fire, your neighbor Edith walks by carrying a bundle of sticks so big it might be sentient. She nods and grumbles something about how someone's been too deep in the commons again. You both know who. You say nothing. That's the rhythm of the village. Here's a fringe delight. Some households use dried peat for fuel. Others burn dried cow dung known as patties. You get used to the smell. Or you pretend to. Today's main meal is a shared one, eaten around the central fire. There's no table, just benches, stools, and that one log that gives splinters to everyone but the cat. You serve the pottage with a ladle carved by your uncle, who once claimed it could detect lies. It broke stirring beans. The bread is coarse, full of grit, and definitely not what modern people would call artisan. But it's yours, baked from your own grain ration, ground at the mill where the miller probably skimmed a bit off the top. He always does. It's tradition, really. You chew slowly. The stew is hot, salty, and tastes like endurance. There's a leaf in it that no one remembers adding. You eat it anyway. Suddenly, there's a commotion. A fig. An actual fig. Brought out by young Alice, whose cousin married a merchant's boy last spring and occasionally sends back treasures. The fig is placed ceremoniously in the center of the bench, and everyone leans in. It's wrinkled, dark, and smells like sugar and dreams. It's sliced into tiny slivers and passed around. Your piece is the size of a thumbnail. You eat it like it's gold. Sweet. Chewy. Gone. That fig will be the talk of the village for days. And that's the thing about food here. It's not just nutrition. It's memory. Celebration. Even defiance. A rare egg on Easter. A sprig of mint in summer. A honeycomb slice when the bees are generous and the priest looks the other way. You help clean the bowls with a bit of crust, then stack them in the corner. They'll be rinsed later at the stream, or not, depending on the weather and your mood. The cat licks one and walks off. No one stops her. She's respected here. Later you'll gather more wood. Maybe barter for a scrap of meat if the miller's in a mood. Maybe trade labor for lentils. It's a constant dance of trade, luck, and patience. But for now, you sit with your family around the embers. Belly's not quite full, but not entirely empty. And that fig taste still lingering like a secret. The wind bites your cheeks before the sun even makes a proper appearance. You pull your cloak tighter, not that it helps, and glance toward the horizon, where the sky is a bruised gray, and the fields look like they're holding their breath. It's not just cold today. It's seasonal. In a medieval village, the calendar doesn't hang on a wall. It pulses through your bones. It rides on the backs of animals, blossoms in hedgerows, and creeps into your joints when the weather turns sour. Time isn't measured in dates but in rhythms. Seasons are your clock, your boss, and your doom. Right now, you're somewhere between late winter and early spring, mud season, as you call it, when the roads become swamps and the sheep develop attitudes. The snow has mostly melted, revealing what it left behind: slush, debris, and the vague scent of regrets. Spring is supposed to be hopeful. Rebirth, renewal, all that poetic stuff. But you know better. Spring is when you run out of winter stores. When last year's grain is mostly mold, and this year's hasn't grown yet. When the cows are skinny, the milk is thin, and the last turnip in the cellar gives you a look like, "You again?" You remember last year's spring. 3 families lost their seedlings in a late frost. One child got lost in a fog so thick it swallowed the lane. The bees didn't return until June. And yet you made it. Barely. You trudge toward the fields anyway, because the first tilling won't wait. Nothing waits. You check the buds on the trees. Some are stubborn. Some are reckless. Just like the villagers. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants feared the seasons or revered them. You think it's both. They bring food, and they take it. They bring light, and then the long dark comes again. You respect the sun more when you've lived through a winter without enough wood. Summer comes fast. Too fast. One day you're worried about frostbite, and the next, you're sunburned, sweating, and screaming at geese again. The fields fill with crops, barley, rye, oats, whatever the Lord has dictated this year. You weed, you water, you whisper to the roots like they'll listen. And sometimes, they do. Here's a delightful tidbit. Some villagers would sing to their fields or bury pieces of bread in the corners to bless the crop. Others just crossed their fingers and threatened the crows with pointed sticks. You've tried both. Summer is also when the reeve is at his most obnoxious, walking the furrows and making notes like a man who owns everything but a sense of humor. You swear he counts your beans just to be petty. Then autumn. Harvest. The rush of gathering, the panic of timing, the calluses, the aching backs, the stolen moments of joy when a sheaf falls just right and you remember why you do this. It's the best time of year, and also the cruelest. If the harvest fails, winter will be a gauntlet. If it succeeds, you breathe easy. Briefly. You store what you can. Dry it. Salt it. Hide it from the rats and the miller. You fill the cellar, patch the roof, and try to mend that one cloak again even though it has more holes than fabric. Then, the cold returns. Winter is not just a season. It's a test. The days shrink. The hearth becomes the center of the world. You spend more time indoors, listening to stories, patching tools, avoiding certain relatives, and calculating how long the salted fish will last if someone keeps taking extra. You've seen snow block the lane for days. You've seen frostbite. You've seen candles burn low and hope burn lower. And yet, when the snow glitters on the thatch, when the silence after a storm wraps around the village like a muffled song, when someone brings out a dried fig or the priest shares a cup of honeyed ale, something stirs in you. A kind of gratitude. Or maybe just stubbornness. It's hard to tell. Seasons shape you. Mold you. Make you curse and sing and kneel and rise. You've learned to tell time by the angle of the sun and the bloom of the elderberries. You know it's midsummer when the bees hum louder than the reeve. You know it's deep winter when even the cat stops bothering with mice. You don't need a calendar. You have the earth. And she keeps time better than any bell. You're hauling a wheelbarrow full of turnips when the shouting starts. 2 voices. Male. One high and pinched like a goat caught in a fence, the other low and booming like someone gargling gravel and righteous fury. You slow your pace and turn toward the village green, where a small crowd is gathering around what can only mean one thing. Manorial Court. It's not as official as it sounds. No stone courthouse, no powdered wigs. Just the Lord's appointed steward sitting on a stool under the old ash tree, holding a cracked slate and looking deeply bored. A second stool sits nearby for the accused, and a third one, smaller, wobblier, is often reserved for public humiliation. That one's occupied more often than not. Today's defendant is Wattle John, which makes sense. Wattle John is in court more than he's in his own home. He once got fined for public drunkenness, and then again for being publicly too sober, which you didn't even know was possible. Today he's arguing with Edwin the Elder about a sheep. Specifically, whose sheep was eating whose beets, and whether said sheep was led or simply had an independent turn of mind. The steward sighs. He knows where this is going. Justice in your village isn't about high drama. It's about keeping the peace, maintaining appearances, and making sure the Lord gets his dues. Most punishments are fines, measured in pence or in kind, eggs, wool, labor, or a public apology so awkward it makes you physically recoil. You settle in with your turnips as the hearing drags on. Arguments are presented, witnesses summoned, someone's niece who's 8 and mostly interested in her shoe, and finally, the verdict, Wattle John is fined 1 chicken and 3 hours repairing the north fence. He protests loudly. He is ignored. Historians still argue whether manorial justice was fair or farce. You think it's a bit of both. The system works. Mostly. If you're lucky. If the Reeve likes you. If you haven't recently insulted someone's butter. But justice is less about law than it is about community memory. And in a village this size, everyone remembers everything. You once saw a man fined for stealing thunder. He'd convinced the children he could make storms with a whistle. The priest was not amused. Here's a strange tidbit. In some regions, the Lord held the right of infangthif, meaning he could try and execute a thief caught red-handed on his land. Your Lord prefers not to kill anyone. It's messy and bad for morale. But you've definitely seen some stocks used more enthusiastically than necessary. Sometimes, punishments get creative. Once, a woman caught spreading false rumors was made to sit outside the church holding a wooden sign that read "Liar," while the children pelted her with spoiled apples. She now sells cider. Coincidence? Your cousin was fined for failing to maintain a hedge in proper verticality. You still tease him about it. His hedge still leans. Occasionally, things get serious. A theft too large, a fire that wasn't an accident, a fight that draws blood. Then the sheriff might get involved, riding in from the Shire court like some grim wind in a chain-mail hauberk. You'd rather keep things local. By mid-afternoon, the cases are done. The steward stands, stretches, and announces that the next court will be held after harvest, assuming no one steals anything more exciting than a goat between now and then. The crowd disperses. Wattle John is already muttering about the unfairness of modern hedge law. You finally deliver your turnips to the communal storehouse and shake your head. Justice in your village isn't swift. It isn't elegant. But it does get the sheep out of the beet patch. And sometimes that's enough. You smell it before you see it. Rot. Sweat. Smoke. A tang of something metallic and wrong. You pause at the edge of the lane. The wind shifts. And that's when you hear the bell. Clang. Clang. Slow. Hollow. Uneven. Not the church bell. Not any bell you want to hear. It's the leper's bell. Or it might be. No one ever quite confirms. But someone's ringing something out by the road, and everyone suddenly remembers they have chores to do very far away from wherever that sound came from. Disease is part of life here. It comes like fog, settles in the bones of the village, and leaves only when it's ready, or when enough people are gone that it runs out of hosts. Today, rumors are flying. A peddler passed through 3 days ago, pale and coughing. Someone's child developed spots. The midwife says it's nothing. The priest says it's divine punishment. The blacksmith says it's fleas. You think it's just Tuesday. Still, when one person falls sick, everyone becomes a little more cautious. Doors close faster. Greetings become nods from further away. The baker uses tongues that aren't fooling anyone. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers understood the causes of disease. The answer is complicated. They didn't know about germs, but they did observe patterns: bad air, foul smells, spoiled food, unlucky moons. They blamed sin. They blamed outsiders. They blamed that one puddle behind the bakehouse that never quite dries. You pass by a house with its shutters closed. No smoke from the chimney. No children outside. You say nothing. You keep walking. Everyone knows what plague looks like. The Black Death may have come and gone, more than once, but its memory lingers in every whispered tale, every panicked glance at a cough. Here's a grim little nugget. In some places, villagers carried posies of herbs or wore masks stuffed with sweet-smelling cloth to ward off miasma. You've done it yourself, stuffed lavender in your tunic, chewed garlic until your breath could kill a frog. It's not science. It's hope. Your friend Elric once claimed to have seen a man with plague boils walking through the woods at twilight, dragging a sack and whispering names. You asked what kind of sack? He said, "Ominous." You let it go. You arrive at the well and notice no one else is there. That's not good. The well is usually a hub of noise. Today, it's silence and a few scuffed footprints in the dust. You draw your water quickly, avoiding the rope with more care than usual. You don't look into the bucket. You definitely don't touch your face. Back home, your wife is scrubbing the doorframe with vinegar. Your mother is muttering a prayer to Saint Sebastian under her breath. Your child asks if they can still visit the neighbors. You say, "Not today," and try to smile. You don't know what tomorrow will look like. And then there's the matter of the bell again. It's still echoing faintly. Was it a warning? A plea? A traveler asking for shelter no one wants to give? The priest says lepers must live outside the village, in huts by the woods. You've seen them, thin figures wrapped in layers, eyes wary, steps cautious. They don't beg. They wait. They ring. You don't see any today. Just that noise, hanging in the air like a question no one wants answered. That night, you sit by the fire, staring into the embers. Your stew tastes fine. Your hands are clean. Your nose hasn't run. And yet, you scratch your arm and wonder if it's just dry skin, or something else. Because illness doesn't arrive with banners. It sneaks in the door when no one's looking. It starts with a sneeze, a chill, a red mark on your chest. And then the village shifts, shrinks, holds its breath. You say your prayers extra slow tonight, just in case. You hear the bleeding first, deep and steady, like a very annoyed choir warming up. Then the clatter of hooves. And then, from behind the smithy, emerges a single file of sheep, moving with the confidence of creatures who believe the entire village was built just for them. Behind them trots Osbert, the shepherd, waving a stick and shouting words that sound suspiciously made up. You step aside just in time to avoid the last sheep, who gives you a look that suggests you're the one who's in the way. Animals are everywhere in your village, not just in the fields or pens, but in it. In your yard, in the street, and sometimes, unfortunately, in your house. If you've never had to chase a goose out of your sleeping space with a spoon, you haven't truly lived here. The daily rhythm of village life isn't set by bells or sermons, it's set by animals. The rooster dictates morning. The cow tells you it's milking time. The pig reminds you that dinner is behind schedule. And the goat? The goat mostly screams for no reason. Your household keeps a few creatures, a hen that lays roughly 1 egg every 3 days and hides it like it's made of gold, a goat who opens gates that aren't hers, and a sheep with 1 ear who follows your child like a smelly guardian spirit. They're not just animals, they're livelihood, heat, meals, wool, and noise all wrapped into one. Historians still argue how closely medieval peasants lived with their animals. The truth is vary. Your cow sleeps in a partition of the house during winter. The warmth is mutual. The smell? Also mutual. You pass the pigsty, where a sow the size of a wine barrel snorts and blinks at you. Her piglets are rooting in the mud with such enthusiasm you briefly envy them. At least they always find something. Here's a charming fringe tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed certain animals could predict the weather. Cows lying down meant rain. Roosters crowing at odd hours meant change. If the cat started washing behind its ears, a storm was definitely coming. You swear by the goose theory. If it stares too long, something terrible is about to happen. It's never been wrong. You stop by the dovecot, small and wooden, perched on a pole behind the Reeves house. Pigeons flutter and coo from within. These birds aren't just for show. They're messengers, meat, and sometimes part of a curious tax arrangement involving feathers. You once helped collect those. Never again. The miller keeps a dog. Not for herding, just for judgment. It lies outside the mill door, watching everything with a squint that suggests it knows your secrets. You've never trusted that dog. As you walk, you pass a child dragging a rope with a duck on the end. No one reacts. The duck is wearing a scrap of cloth like a cape. Again, no reaction. Village children and their animal companions are just a part of the background. But not all animals are benign. You remember last year's bull incident. A young bull got loose from the Lord's enclosure and rampaged through the village green, overturning benches, terrifying geese, which he didn't think was possible, and somehow winding up inside the bakehouse. The baker has never fully recovered. Neither has the door frame. And then there's the rats. Uninvited, sneaky, prolific. You see signs of them everywhere. Chewed sacks, nibbled grain, that feeling of being watched from under the hay. Cats help. So do traps. Mostly, you just accept the constant low-grade war and try to stay one step ahead. But animals aren't just resources or nuisances. They're stories. They're part of the landscape of your life. The ox that pulled your first plow. The ewe that nuzzled your hand during a thunderstorm. The chicken that followed your wife around for a month after she fed it bits of cheese. They're unpredictable, frustrating, and far too clever. Like the goat. The one that lives at the edge of the commons. No one owns it. No one feeds it. But it's always there, watching, waiting. You're not saying it's magical, but once it appeared on the roof of the church and refused to come down for 2 days. Even Father Oswin gave up trying to exorcise it. As the sun sets, you lead your own animals inside, chickens into their pen, goat into her corner, and the cat into your lap whether you invited her or not. The fire crackles. The smells of hay and wood smoke mingle. Somewhere outside, a cow lows softly. You rest your head against the wall and close your eyes. The village may belong to people, but the animals run it. It starts with a clang, then a grunt, then a hiss, then another clang, louder this time, metal striking metal in the unmistakable rhythm of a man arguing with iron. You follow the sound to the forge, where smoke curls from the chimney like a warning and the air smells like singed beard and burnt ambition. Inside, the blacksmith is hard at work, bare arms glistening, hammer flying, curses creative. The forge glows red-hot. So does his temper. This is where metal is born. Or reborn, rather. Old tools remade. Hooves shod. Nails shaped. Horseshoes forged. Axes balanced. It's loud, it's hot, and frankly it's magic. You've watched him take raw iron and turn it into something sharp enough to cut through oak. He once did it with one eye closed just to prove a point. You didn't ask what the point was. You just applauded. The blacksmith is the heartbeat of your village, not in the cozy, brings muffins way, but in the you literally can't function without him way. Without him, no plows. No hinges. No locks. No way to fix the thing that broke when you leaned on it too hard trying to reach that high-hung ham. But he's not the only craftsman around. You pass the weaver's cottage next. Threads of every color hang in the window, a rainbow trying very hard not to fade in the sunlight. Inside, the weaver works the loom like a musician, foot, hand, shuttle, repeat. The cloth hums. It's not always soft, but it's warm. And it keeps the wind out better than optimism. Next door lives the carpenter. He smells like sawdust and decisions. He built half the village benches and most of the cradles. When the wind knocked your door off its hinges last winter, he showed up with a look that said, "I told you to fix it." Then he fixed it anyway. Not far away, the cooper works among barrels stacked like drunken sentinels. He shapes staves, binds hoops, mutters about shrinkage. You once asked him what the difference was between a good barrel and a bad one. He pointed at a cracked one and said, "That leaks." You didn't ask again. And then there's the thatcher. Perched on rooftops like a crow with better tools. He bundles straw with more precision than most people used to write their names. He can read the sky and tell you when to rush. You trust him more than the reeve. But perhaps the most curious job in the village belongs to the fuller. Historians still argue why anyone chose fulling. It's thankless, wet, and smells like something that should never have existed. But it's necessary. The fuller cleans and thickens wool cloth, traditionally by stomping it in a vat of stale urine. Yes, you heard that right. You once asked him what he thinks about while he's ankle-deep in human waste. He said, "Justice." No one knows what that means. You're a little afraid to ask. Here's a fringe fact. Some villages had a professional ale taster. Their job was to ensure local brews weren't poisoned or poorly made. It sounds like a dream job, until you realize how many bad batches you'd have to drink to prove it. The current ale taster in your village is partially deaf and completely cheerful. He claims that's unrelated. Craftsmen are everywhere. The potter at the edge of the village, spinning mud into jugs. The candlemaker who always smells faintly of tallow and regret. The tanner, whose leather is perfect but whose house you avoid unless your nose is broken. And let's not forget the bone carver. He whittles combs, beads, and small animal figurines out of leftover sheep parts. You own one. It looks like a dog, or a very self-conscious cow. Each craft feeds the others. The blacksmith makes the tools for the cooper. The cooper makes barrels for the ale. The ale makes the carpenter sing off-key while working on your doorframe. It's a system. A web. 1,000 quiet acts of creation that keep your village breathing. As the sun dips and the last hammer rings out, you sit outside with your bowl of stew and think about how many hands it took to make your day possible. Not lords. Not saints. Not heroes. Just smiths, weavers, coopers, carvers. And maybe, just maybe, that fuller. Stomping his way toward justice. The sky darkens a little too fast today. The clouds hang low, heavy and mean-looking, and the breeze carries that electric tang that makes your teeth itch. You pull your cloak tighter and look up, then immediately regret it. A flock of crows wheels overhead in awkward, jerky circles, like someone tipped the sky and forgot to catch the birds. Everyone sees it. No one says anything? Not at first. Then little Gilda points and says, "Is that a sign?" And just like that, the village hum begins. Soft murmurs. Shifting glances. The kind of quiet panic that builds in your bones like cold water rising. Because here, weather is never just weather. You hear someone mutter about Saint Scholastica. Someone else crosses themselves. And before you've even made it back to your own threshold, you've heard 5 different theories, ranging from bad air from the east to definitely because that pig was born with 2 spots on its back instead of 1. Superstition doesn't live on the edges of your village life. It is your village life. You carry it in your pocket with the iron nail that wards off spirits, whisper it before planting peas, and trace it into the bread crust on feast days. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in omens, or just used them to explain what they couldn't control. You suspect it's both. You've seen a grown man spend 10 minutes throwing salt over his left shoulder because he dreamed of owls the night before. You get it. When you're one bad harvest from starvation, you start to take the sky very personally. Today, you're supposed to help thatch a neighbor's roof. But halfway through the job, a sharp gust blows the ladder into a puddle and scatters the straw like angry confetti. The thatcher looks at the clouds. Then at you. Then back at the clouds. "Best to leave it," he says, which is village speak for something's coming and I'd like to be indoors when it does. You nod. You don't argue. Here's a fun fringe detail. Your village still observes, weather days, unofficial rituals based on superstition. When it rains while the sun is shining, someone's obligated to sing a song about foxes getting married. If lightning strikes twice in the same field, that land is left fallow the next season. No one remembers why. Everyone obeys it anyway. You head for the church, not for mass, but because it's the tallest thing in the village, and that bell tower gives you a good look at the horizon. You pass the priest along the way. He's muttering about revelations. Or maybe about the price of salt. Hard to tell with him. From the bell tower, you see the storm rolling in like a living thing. The sky is greenish black, and the wind dances through the barley fields, flattening them in rippling streaks. A dog barks. Somewhere, a door slams. And then the first thunder cracks. You descend fast, heart thumping. At home, you shutter the windows, double bar the door, and toss a pinch of rosemary into the fire, just in case. Agnes sets out bowls of salt at each corner of the hearth. Not because it works. Because it might. The children are quiet. The animals are restless. The fire crackles with too much energy. And outside, the storm arrives. Rain lashes the thatch like angry fingers. The wind howls through the eaves. Thunder shakes the walls, and lightning claws the sky into jagged pieces. You sit together in the dark, not speaking, not moving, just listening. To the wrath. To the chaos. To whatever this moment is trying to teach. When the worst of it passes, you step outside. The air smells of ozone and wet leaves. The lane is a river. A tree near the mill is split down the center like a snapped wishbone. The villagers gather slowly, blinking at the light. No one says much. A few nods. A few prayers. One woman spits 3 times and mutters about bad moons. You help the thatcher retrieve his scattered straw. Someone finds a drowned rat in a puddle and says it means a dry summer. Another shrugs and says it means soup. Superstition is survival here. Not just because it helps you make sense of storms and sickness and seasons, but because it binds you together. Gives your fears a name. Gives your choices a shape. Reminds you that, whether the thunder is God or just the sky throwing a tantrum, you're not alone beneath it. You see him before he sees you. Bent over a ledger so big it needs its own table, fingers stained with ink, and face set in a frown so permanent it may be carved from oak. The manor's clerk, Brother Stephen. He's not a monk technically, but he trained in a monastery and speaks with that careful, measured tone that makes you feel guilty even when you're innocent. Which you rarely are, at least not during tally season. It's Dew's Day, and that means everyone in the village is nervous. Brother Stephen sits in a corner of the manor solar, hunched beneath a narrow window, scratching out figures that seem designed specifically to make you feel bad about your barley. A wax tablet rests nearby for quick calculations, though he still uses a piece of knotted string to track who's paid in wool versus eggs. You approach the table like it's a confessional, your cap in your hand, your best smile barely hiding the dread in your gut. You know what's coming. Name? He asks, without looking up. You give it. Slowly. Clearly. He squints, flips 3 pages, and finds you. Ah. He frowns deeper. The problem isn't that you haven't paid. You have. Mostly. The problem is that no one, including Brother Stephen, is ever quite sure how much you owe, or whether last year's extra piglet counts toward your spring tally, or if that broken plowshare is considered a justifiable hardship, or reckless equipment negligence. Historians still argue whether medieval accounting was meticulous, or a total mess. The truth? It was both. Ledgers were detailed, painfully so, but math was fuzzy, memory was flexible, and half the symbols looked like someone spilled ink and called it bookkeeping. You pull out your offerings, 3 bundles of flax, 6 eggs, 1 cracked, and a small jar of honey. It's not quite everything, but it's respectable. Brother Stephen raises one eyebrow. You feel 10 inches shorter. Then comes the questioning. Where's the 10th sheaf from your north strip? Did you settle the ale fine from Michaelmas? Is this honey from your bees or someone else's? You answer as best you can. You lie once, about the sheaf, and immediately regret it. He marks something down with an ominous Here's a curious tidbit. Some clerks develop their own shorthand to keep up with the volume of records. Brother Stephen's notes look like bird footprints having a nervous breakdown, but he insists they're clear. You once asked what one symbol meant. He told you it was the mark of insufficient piety. You haven't asked since. After the questioning comes the adjustment. That's when he mutters to himself, consults a smaller book labeled overages, and announces you still owe a 1/4 bushel of oats and 1 goat's worth of equivalent goods. You offer your boots. He does not laugh. Back in the courtyard, you find others clutching their own receipts, scraps of parchment, tally marks scratched into sticks, and one unfortunate man who was given a red feather as a temporary placeholder for future settlement. He's still not sure if it's good or bad. The mood is sour. People complain. Quietly. Always quietly. No one likes Dew's Day. Not even the clerk. You once caught Brother Stephen muttering about being born for bigger scrolls. He dreams of cathedral archives, of counting things that don't bleed or cluck. You almost feel bad for him. Almost. By afternoon, The sun hangs low and the tally is nearly done. One old woman offers a song instead of coin. The steward allows it, this time. A boy pays his family's debt in eels. Brother Stephen doesn't flinch. And then it's done. For now. You return home lighter in goods but heavier in spirit. You check your stores. You sigh. You start mentally calculating how many extra hours of ditch digging you'll have to offer to make up next month's shortfall. Still, there's a strange comfort in the system's consistency. As much as you dread it, the rhythm of dues, the questions, the counting, the awkward silence when someone tries to pay with questionable mushrooms, reminds you that the village works. Clumsily, unevenly, occasionally unfairly, but it works. You pass Brother Stephen again at dusk. He's stretching his hands and rubbing his temples. He looks tired. Human. You nod. He nods back. Then he makes a note. Of course he does. You see him before he sees you. Bent over a ledger so big it needs its own table, fingers stained with ink, and face set in a frown so permanent it may be carved from oak. The manor's clerk, Brother Stephen. He's not a monk technically, but he trained in a monastery and speaks with that careful, measured tone that makes you feel guilty even when you're innocent. Which you rarely are, at least not during tally season. It's dues day. And that means everyone in the village is nervous. Brother Stephen sits in a corner of the manor solar, hunched beneath a narrow window, scratching out figures that seem designed specifically to make you feel bad about your barley. A wax tablet rests nearby for quick calculations, though he still uses a piece of knotted string to track who's paid in wool versus eggs. You approach the table like it's a confessional, your cap in your hand, your best smile barely hiding the dread in your gut. You know what's coming. Name? He asks, without looking up. You give it. Slowly. Clearly. He squints, flips 3 pages, and finds you. Ah. He frowns deeper. The problem isn't that you haven't paid. You have. Mostly. The problem is that no one, including Brother Stephen, is ever quite sure how much you owe, or whether last year's extra piglet counts toward your spring tally, or if that broken plowshare is considered a justifiable hardship, or reckless equipment negligence. Historians still argue whether medieval accounting was meticulous, or a total mess. The truth? It was both. Ledgers were detailed, painfully so, but math was fuzzy, memory was flexible, and half the symbols looked like someone spilled ink and called it bookkeeping. You pull out your offerings, 3 bundles of flax, 6 eggs, 1 cracked, and a small jar of honey. It's not quite everything, but it's respectable. Brother Stephen raises one eyebrow. You feel 10 inches shorter. Then comes the questioning. Where's the 10th sheaf from your north strip? Did you settle the ale fine from Michaelmas? Is this honey from your bees or someone else's? You answer as best you can. You lie once, about the sheaf, and immediately regret it. He marks something down with an ominous Here's a curious tidbit. Some clerks develop their own shorthand to keep up with the volume of records. Brother Stephen's notes look like bird footprints having a nervous breakdown, but he insists they're clear. You once asked what one symbol meant. He told you it was the mark of insufficient piety. You haven't asked since. After the questioning comes the adjustment. That's when he mutters to himself, consults a smaller book labeled overages, and announces you still owe a 1/4 bushel of oats and 1 goat's worth of equivalent goods. You offer your boots. He does not laugh. Back in the courtyard, you find others clutching their own receipts, scraps of parchment, tally marks scratched into sticks, and one unfortunate man who was given a red feather as a temporary placeholder for future settlement. He's still not sure if it's good or bad. The mood is sour. People complain. Quietly. Always quietly. No one likes dues day. Not even the clerk. You once caught Brother Stephen muttering about being born for bigger scrolls. He dreams of cathedral archives, of counting things that don't bleed or cluck. You almost feel bad for him. Almost. By afternoon, the sun hangs low and the tally is nearly done. One old woman offers a song instead of coin. The steward allows it, this time. A boy pays his family's debt in eels. Brother Stephen doesn't flinch. And then it's done. For now. You return home lighter in goods but heavier in spirit. You check your stores. You sigh. You start mentally calculating how many extra hours of ditch digging you'll have to offer to make up next month's shortfall. Still, there's a strange comfort in the system's consistency. As much as you dread it, the rhythm of dues, the questions, the counting, the awkward silence when someone tries to pay with questionable mushrooms, reminds you that the village works. Clumsily, unevenly, occasionally unfairly, but it works. You pass Brother Stephen again at dusk. He's stretching his hands and rubbing his temples. He looks tired. Human. You nod. He nods back. Then he makes a note. Of course he does. The first frost hasn't landed yet, but you can feel winter sneaking up behind the trees. The shadows stretch longer. The wind smells sharper. The nights arrive faster than you expect, catching you mid-task, lanternless, swearing softly while trying to find the right pile of firewood in the dark. And that's when it starts. The great village scramble. Because no matter how much you planned, no matter how many times you said you'd get ahead this year, winter always arrives like a guest 2 weeks early, with a howling breath and cold hands that reach under your door. You're not alone in the panic. Everywhere you look, someone's hauling something. Bundles of kindling. Baskets of turnips. Bales of hay stacked higher than what the laws of physics, or that one cow, should allow. Your own cottage looks like it's trying to hibernate. The windows are stuffed with straw. The door frame has been mended with rags soaked in lard. The roof, well, the roof is a prayer held together with twine, mud, and a goat that refuses to come down. Preparing for winter isn't a list, it's a mood. A state of mind somewhere between survival and desperate improvisation. You start with firewood. Everyone does. You collect it from the commons, from the woods carefully, before the steward notices, from old fence posts that fell over on their own. You stack it high, wide, and a little crooked behind the house. Then someone takes a few pieces. Then the wind knocks some down. Then the children use a bundle to build a fort. You try not to scream. Then comes food. The cellar is your savings account, filled with what you've dried, salted, smoked, or simply buried in hopes it won't rot. Cabbages hang from the rafters like suspicious lanterns. Beans rest in sacks, alongside barley and oats, and that one jar of pickled something no one will claim. Agnes is better at this than you. She's been organizing the pantry since midsummer. Herbs tied in bunches hang from every beam. There's a system. You don't understand it. You don't need to. She hands you a jar and says, "Don't eat that before December." You nod and hide it behind the salt. You will definitely eat it before December. You check the walls for drafts, patching holes with mud, rags, and half a boot. You stuff old clothes under the door. You light a fire and test how far the warmth reaches. The answer is, not far. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers would hang dried foxglove above the hearth to ward off cold spirits. Others just added another cat. You're up to 2.5 cats. You're not sure who owns the half. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants truly dreaded winter or simply endured it as part of life's rhythm. You'd say it's a bit like childbirth, painful, inevitable, and talked about with far too much nostalgia once it's over. You help your neighbor repair his thatch. In exchange, he gives you a bit of smoked eel. You hate eel. But you accept it, because by January, any protein tastes like gold. The children gather acorns. The elders sharpen blades. The reeve goes around making vague comments like, "You'll want to double-check that lintel," while not offering any actual help. Classic. You fix what you can. Mend what you must. And what you can't, well, you move the bed further from that part of the wall and pretend it doesn't drip when it rains. By the end of the week, the village has taken on a different energy. Huddled, hunched, cautious. People walk faster. Talk quieter. The geese look offended at the cold. The goats act like nothing has changed, because they are goats. Then the first frost does arrive. A glittering coat of white along the roof lines. A thin sheet of ice over the well. The children rush to see their breath. You rush to cover the cabbages. And suddenly it's here. Winter. You sit by the fire that night, wool wrapped around your shoulders, feet near the coals, listening to the sound of wind in the chimney, and something scratching on the roof that is hopefully just a branch. You're not ready. No one ever is. But you've stacked the wood. You've salted the meat. You've checked the door 3 times and added another cat for warmth. And you've faced worse. Probably. By the time darkness folds over the village like a woolen blanket, the air is thick with hearth smoke, the clink of wooden bowls, and the quiet mutter of prayers whispered more from habit than hope. You light a small oil lamp and watch the flame flicker, orange and alive, dancing against the stone wall like it's telling stories. Outside, the wind sighs across the thatch, nudging shutters and settling into its usual winter grumble. Inside, it's warmer. Not warm exactly, but warmer. Enough. Dinner's done. A pottage scraped clean. A crust of rye bread shared between the children. One of them tried to barter for more with a single beet and a promise to do chores tomorrow. You almost said yes. Almost. Now comes the only truly quiet time of the day. Evenings in your cottage follow the same slow rhythm every night. Shoes off, finally, cloaks hung, fire banked, and voices lowered. You sit on the bench nearest the hearth, rubbing your hands and listening to the crackle of wood like it's a favorite song played too slowly. Agnes knits. Or pretends to. She hasn't moved a stitch in 10 minutes. One of the children is already snoring, sprawled at an angle that defies anatomy. Another dozes against your side, head heavy on your arm. The goat is outside. Allegedly. This is when the stories begin. Your eldest clears his throat, too loudly, and starts in on the one about the ghost that haunts the old barley field. You've heard it 100 times, but you don't interrupt. It's part of the script now. Every night, someone tells a story. Usually funny. Sometimes frightening. Always familiar. You think about how little the world sees of your life here. To them, a medieval village is all hardship and hay. Dirt and drudgery. But sitting here, in the orange firelight, with bread in your belly and laughter still echoing faintly from your throat, you know. Better. You know that survival is stitched together from these small moments. Warmth, work, ritual, and rest. That a day well lived here isn't one without struggle, but one where the struggle is shared. And tonight? Tonight was that kind of day. The flame flickers lower. Agnes gathers the sleeping youngest and eases them into the straw bed in the corner. You follow, shoulders sore, feet cold, but mind quieter than it's been in a week. You lie down beneath the wool blanket, coarse and itchy but familiar, and listen. To the breath of the fire. To the gentle snort of the goat finally settling outside. To the winter wind, rattling the shutters just enough to make you glad you're not out there. And slowly, everything softens. The cottage. The world. Your thoughts. Your eyes close. And so the village exhales. The night deepens, folding over the rooftops like a velvet tide. The animals sleep. The tools rest. The hearth flickers its last golden sigh. You're wrapped in layers, not just of wool and linen, but of rhythm. Of repetition. Of knowing that the earth turns, the seasons shift, and the morning will come again. It always does. The wind outside, once sharp and mischievous, settles into a steady hush. It combs gently over the barley fields, brushes the eaves, nudges the shutters, but doesn't enter. You've barred the door. You've banked the fire. You've done everything you were supposed to do. And now there's nothing left to chase. Nothing more to fix. The room around you breathes with quiet life. Slow and warm. You hear a soft murmur as someone dreams. Maybe it's a field. A fig. A better roof. It doesn't matter. Here, in this village, dreams belong to everyone. Passed along like bread at the table, small and sustaining. Your fingers are still sore from work. But even that feels distant now. The ache is no longer sharp. It's just a memory, dissolving under the lull of sleep's approach. Even the goat is silent. And so you lie still, safe in your straw bed, held by the weight of blankets, and time, and the gentle certainty that, yes, tomorrow you'll wake and begin it all again. But not yet. Now you rest. Let the wind sing for you. Let the fire keep its silent vigil. Let the darkness wrap around you like a story told in slow motion. You are here. You are home. And you have survived another day. Sleep well, dear villager. The night is long, but you are longer. And morning is already dreaming of you. Hey guys. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means a lot and I look forward to bringing you new topics soon. Stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you.